He thought he was invisible, just another face in the crowd. But that night, everything changed. Walking down streets he'd known his whole life, he became a target. Not for what he did, but for the color of his skin. In moments, laughter turned to threats, glances turned to danger, and the world he trusted dissolved around him. No one stepped in. No one seemed to care. And what happened next wasn't just about him. It revealed a system built to ignore pain, to punish innocence, and to let fear dictate who survives. What would you do if the life you knew was ripped away in seconds, simply because of who you are? This is his story, and it's one that America is still struggling to face. But the real shock was yet to come, and what he would uncover next would leave him questioning everything he thought was safe in his own city. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Jamal had spent the morning at his favorite cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book, the way he always did when he needed a break from the chaos of the city. He smiled at familiar faces, waved at neighbors he'd known for years, and felt a sense of comfort in the routines that made his world feel safe. His neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was home. Familiar streets, old trees, and the small corners of peace he clung to after long work days. But that sense of normalcy was fragile. Jamal had no idea that eyes were watching him in ways he couldn't yet see, or that the simple act of walking home could make him a target. The subtle glances, the whispered comments, the invisible lines drawn by prejudice, all of it was waiting, like a storm he couldn't predict. As he adjusted his bag and stepped onto the street, unaware of the danger ahead, Jamal's day was about to unravel in ways that would test every ounce of his courage. And what started as a simple walk home would soon spiral into a nightmare that would shake him to his core. As Jamal continued down the familiar streets, the air felt heavier, though he couldn't explain why. A group of men lingered near the corner store, their eyes tracking him in ways that made his skin crawl. He quickened his pace, telling himself it was nothing, that he was imagining it. But then a car slowed alongside the curb, the driver staring too long, too hard. Jamal's heart thudded in his chest. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Yet the normal rhythm of his neighborhood kept him moving forward. It started subtly. A shove on the sidewalk from someone who muttered a word he couldn't hear, a hand gesture from a passing driver, whispers in a park where he often jogged. At first, he brushed them off, forcing himself to believe these were coincidences, nothing more than fleeting moments. But the incidents grew bolder, sharper, impossible to ignore. Doors that had always opened for him now slammed shut. Strangers crossed the street to avoid him, while neighbors who once smiled now stared with suspicion. The world he knew was tilting, inch by inch, and there was no warning sign to tell him when it would collapse entirely. By the third week, the harassment escalated into violence. One evening, he was cornered at a bus stop by two men whose faces were masked in shadow. Their voices were cold, filled with a menace he had only read about in headlines. They called him names that cut deep, not just to his pride, but to the very essence of who he was. Jamal's mind raced. Should he fight? Should he flee? He chose the latter, running through alleys he had never used, his chest burning, fear rooting his feet to the pavement and propelling him forward at the same time. The city he once trusted had become a labyrinth of danger, and every familiar landmark now felt like a trap. Even when he thought he could escape, the injustice followed. Police officers passed him by, their eyes avoiding his entirely. Ignoring the assault, he barely managed to survive. Calls for help echoed into silence, and the system that promised protection became yet another layer of threat. Friends who once offered comfort now hesitated, fearful that association could bring the same scrutiny. Jamal realized that the hatred wasn't random. It was systemic, woven into every street, every glance, every interaction. The weight of isolation pressed on him like a storm cloud, relentless and suffocating. And yet, Jamal refused to disappear quietly. Every step he took, every narrow escape, hardened his resolve. The fear that gripped him now fueled something sharper. Determination. He wouldn't allow himself to be erased, to vanish as if the injustices he faced were invisible. But the question lingered. How far would the system allow this torment to go? How far would they push him before it became more than he could endure? The streets he had once walked with ease were now a battlefield, and every shadow hinted at the next danger lurking just out of sight. And what happened next would push Jamal into a confrontation with a truth he could no longer ignore. one that would change everything he thought he knew about safety, justice, and who really holds the power. The night was suffocating, thick with tension and the faint hum of distant traffic. Jamal found himself trapped at the edge of a dimly lit parking lot, the faces of his aggressors illuminated by the weak glow of a flickering street lamp. Their voices, sharp and hateful, cut through the silence like knives. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like stone, frozen between fear and defiance. One of them stepped closer, a shadow looming over him, hand raised in a threatening gesture. Jamal's heart pounded, every beat echoing like a drum in his ears. He felt the weight of every insult, every shove, every closed door he had endured over the past weeks pressing down on him. This was the moment the harassment, the prejudice, the injustice had all been building toward. He could see it in their eyes. This wasn't a simple confrontation anymore. This was a test of his survival, his dignity, and the fragile boundaries of the world around him. Time seemed to stretch, each second a lifetime. Jamal's breath came fast, his mind racing through every possible escape, every strategy he had rehearsed in fleeting moments of desperation. But then came the harsh realization. Running wasn't enough. Standing still, submitting, hoping for mercy, either could cost him more than he was willing to lose. And then it happened, the shove, the yell, the collective sneer that made his blood run cold. In that instant, the city he thought he knew, the streets he had walked safely for years, turned into a stage of cruelty, of systemic hatred. The injustice of it all hit him like a wave, relentless and unforgiving. And yet, amidst the fear, a spark ignited within him, a refusal to be invisible, a determination that the world would not erase him silently. He realized that survival wasn't just about escaping the moment. It was about confronting it, bearing witness to it, and refusing to let it define him. His pulse raced, his vision sharpened, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the raw power of his own resilience. But just as he thought he could push past the terror, a sound behind him froze him. Footsteps, closer this time, and not all of them hostile. Help was near, or was it another trap? Every decision now carried the weight of life and death. And in that heartbeat between fear and action, Jamal knew that everything was about to change, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jamal finally made it home that night, exhausted, trembling, but alive. The fear that had gripped him for weeks didn't vanish. It lingered in the shadows of his apartment, in the quiet moments when the city outside seemed too loud, too indifferent. He replayed every step, every glance, every shove, realizing how easily life could have been taken from him, simply because of the color of his skin. But amidst the fear and anger, a quiet determination began to grow. Jamal refused to let this injustice define him or erase his presence. He reached out to community groups, shared his story, and found others who had endured the same hidden cruelties. Together, their voices were louder than the silence that had tried to smother them. He realized that the fight wasn't just personal, it was collective. Every whisper of prejudice, every act of discrimination was part of a system that needed to be challenged, exposed, and changed. Jamal's life would never be the same, but neither would his perspective. He saw the city differently now, not just as streets and buildings, but as a landscape of inequality, a place where courage mattered as much as caution. He understood the weight of invisibility, the cost of prejudice, and the importance of speaking out. This wasn't just Jamal's story. It was a story of millions who face injustice every day, often unseen, often ignored. And the question lingers long after the fear has passed. How many more have to endure this before we truly see the world as it is? How long will silence protect the oppressor while the vulnerable suffer? Jamal's journey is a reminder that change begins with recognition, with empathy, with action. It asks us all to look closer, to listen harder, and to refuse to let another person's life be defined by hatred. The world may try to ignore it, but the truth cannot be silenced.